Don't tell me she invited that vagrant to her engagement party, whispered Mrs. Hamilton as she watched Luna rush across the crowded restaurant to embrace a disheveled man who had just walked to the front door. The other guests turned to stare, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips as they witnessed what appeared to be the most inappropriate moment in the history of upscale dining. But what happened next would leave everyone speechless. Within minutes, 8 Navy SEALs in dress uniforms appeared at the entrance, moving with military precision toward the woman who had just shocked an entire room by treating a homeless stranger like family. Welcome to those who left a trace, where ordinary people carry the most extraordinary secrets. Before we dive into this incredible story that will leave you speechless, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that everyone deserves respect no matter how they appear on the surface, hit that subscribe button. Luna Rodriguez had built her life around routines that made sense to everyone who knew her. At 26, she stood 5 feet 4 inches tall with shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the light when she moved through the morning crowds of downtown Portland. Her green eyes held a warmth that made customers feel welcome at Morrison's Deli, where she had worked as a sandwich maker for the past 2 years. She arrived each morning at 5:30 sharp, 30 minutes before opening, not because she needed the extra time to prepare, but because those 30 minutes belonged to someone else entirely. Every morning, without exception, Luna would prepare a hot breakfast and coffee in a brown paper bag. She would slip out the back door of the deli and walk 2 blocks to Pioneer Courthouse Square, where an elderly man with silver hair and worn clothing sat on the same bench, feeding pigeons with breadcrumbs he collected from garbage cans around the city. She never asked his name, and he never offered it. Their interaction consisted of a simple exchange. Food for a grateful nod, coffee for a brief smile, and sometimes, on the coldest mornings, a few words about the weather. Her co-workers at Morrison's had noticed the pattern, of course. Dylan, the assistant manager, had commented more than once about Luna's habit of taking food to that homeless guy, usually with a kind of eye roll that suggested he thought she was being taken advantage of by someone who would probably spend any money he received on alcohol or drugs. Maya, who worked the afternoon shift, had been more direct in her criticism, telling Luna that her charity was enabling rather than helping, and that there were proper channels for people who wanted to make a difference in the lives of the homeless. Luna had listened to these comments with the same patient silence she applied to most aspects of her life. She never argued, never defended her actions, never explained that her morning ritual had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with recognition. She simply continued her routine day after day, treating it with the same quiet consistency that characterized everything else about her carefully constructed existence. The truth was that Luna Rodriguez was very good at being invisible. In 2 years of working at Morrison's Deli, she had perfected the art of being exactly what people expected her to be: reliable, pleasant, unremarkable. She completed her shifts with efficient competence, took her breaks at designated times, and avoided the kind of workplace drama that might draw unwanted attention to her background or her reasons for choosing such an anonymous job. But invisibility, Luna had learned, was a skill that required constant maintenance. It meant suppressing instincts that had been trained through experiences most people couldn't imagine. It meant ignoring situational awareness that automatically cataloged exit routes, potential weapons, and threat assessments every time she entered a new environment. It meant pretending that the calluses on her hands came from sandwich preparation rather than activities that would have raised questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The elderly man on the bench represented something different from charity or social conscience. He represented the kind of invisible person that most of society walked past without seeing, the kind of individual who existed in the spaces between normal life and the margins where people ended up when circumstances beyond their control reshaped their existence. Luna understood invisibility in ways that her co-workers never would, which was why she recognized something in the man's eyes that others missed entirely. He carried himself with a posture that spoke of military training, despite the threadbare coat and worn shoes that marked him as homeless. His awareness of his surroundings was too sharp, too systematic to belong to someone whose only concerns were finding shelter and locating the next meal. When he accepted the food she brought him, his hands moved with precision that suggested muscle memory developed through activities requiring fine motor control under pressure. These details might not have been significant to a casual observer, but Luna noticed them because she had been trained to notice them. More importantly, she noticed them because she recognized them as echoes of her own carefully suppressed instincts, the habits that marked people who had served in capacities that existed outside the normal understanding of military service. 3 months ago, Luna's carefully maintained routine had been disrupted by an announcement that changed everything about her future while threatening to expose everything about her past. Her boyfriend of 18 months, David Chun, had proposed marriage during a weekend trip to the Oregon coast. The proposal itself had been everything she could have hoped for: romantic, thoughtful, and delivered by a man who loved the person she appeared to be without having any idea who she actually was. David worked as a software engineer for a tech company that developed security systems for financial institutions. He was kind, intelligent, and completely normal in ways that Luna found both comforting and terrifying. Their relationship represented everything she had thought she wanted when she decided to build a new life: stability, predictability, and connection with someone who would never ask questions about the years before she arrived in Portland. But marriage meant families, and families meant background checks, and background checks meant the possibility that David would learn things about Luna Rodriguez that would challenge everything he believed about the woman he wanted to spend his life with. It also meant engagement parties with guest lists that included David's friends, family, and professional colleagues, people who would expect Luna to fit seamlessly into a world of normal relationships and conventional backgrounds. The engagement party had been David's idea, a celebration at Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant that catered to the kind of people who measured success by the quality of their wine knowledge and their ability to pronounce menu items correctly. Luna had agreed to the party because refusing would have required explanations she wasn't prepared to provide. But every aspect of the evening felt like a performance that required her to be someone she wasn't entirely comfortable being. The guest list included David's co-workers in the tech company, his college friends who had moved to Portland after graduation, his parents who had driven up from Sacramento for the occasion, and his sister who worked as a marketing executive for a firm that specialized in promoting luxury brands. These were successful, educated people who lived conventional lives and had conventional expectations about the kinds of women their friends and family members chose to marry. Luna had spent the week before the party shopping for an appropriate dress, something that would help her blend into a crowd of people whose idea of casual Friday still involved clothes that cost more than she earned in a month at Morrison's Deli. She had settled on a navy blue dress that was elegant without being flashy, professional without being boring, the kind of outfit that would help her disappear into the background of a room full of people who were much more comfortable with social attention than she was. The evening had started exactly as Luna had expected. Conversations about software development projects, discussions about real estate prices in different Portland neighborhoods, and debates about restaurant recommendations that revealed how differently these people experienced the city compared to someone who worked in food service and lived in a studio apartment that cost 60% of her monthly income. Luna had navigated these conversations with the same careful competence she brought to every other aspect of her constructed life. She smiled at appropriate moments, asked questions that demonstrated interest without revealing ignorance, and shared carefully edited stories about her work at the deli that portrayed her job as a temporary situation rather than a deliberate choice to remain invisible. David's mother, Patricia Chun, had been particularly interested in Luna's background, asking questions about her family, her education, and her plans for the future with a persistent curiosity of someone who wanted to ensure her son was making a good decision. Luna had provided answers that were technically truthful while avoiding the kind of details that would have transformed a pleasant engagement party into an interrogation session about classified military operations and career changes that involved faking her own death. The party was proceeding smoothly until the moment Luna glanced toward the restaurant's front entrance and saw him. The elderly man from Pioneer Courthouse Square, dressed in his threadbare coat and worn shoes, standing in the doorway of Romano's like he had been transported from an entirely different world. His presence in this environment was so unexpected. So completely out of place that for a moment Luna wondered if she was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But he was real, and he was looking directly at her with an expression that contained layers of meaning she couldn't immediately decipher. Recognition, certainly, but also something that looked like urgency, as if his presence at her engagement party wasn't coincidental, but necessary for reasons that would become clear only after she acknowledged him. The conversations around Luna continued without interruption because nobody else had noticed the incongruous figure in the doorway. David was discussing database architecture with one of his co-workers. Patricia Chun was explaining her volunteer work with literacy program to Luna's maid of honor. The restaurant's other patrons continued their meals without looking up from their conversations about wine pairings and weekend plans. But Luna saw him, and more importantly, she understood that he had come here specifically to see her. The realization hit her like a physical blow, because it meant her carefully maintained anonymity had been compromised, her location had been tracked, and her constructed identity as Luna Rodriguez might be about to collide with whoever she had been before she decided to disappear into the margins of normal society. The smart thing to do would have been to ignore him, to pretend she hadn't seen him, to let restaurant security handle what appeared to be a homeless person who had wandered into an establishment where he clearly didn't belong. The safe thing would have been to protect her cover story, maintain her relationship with David, and continue performance of being someone whose biggest concerns involved sandwich preparation and engagement party planning. Instead, Luna excused herself from the conversation she had been having with David's sister and walked across the restaurant toward a man who represented everything she had been trying to leave behind. She moved with purpose that felt like muscle memory, her awareness of the room shifting automatically to tactical mode as she cataloged potential complications, exit routes, and the locations of everyone who might be affected if this encounter escalated beyond polite conversation. The whispers started before she was halfway across the room. Mrs. Hamilton's comment about inviting vagrants was just the first of many observations from guests who were trying to understand why the guest of honor at an engagement party was approaching someone who looked like he belonged in a shelter rather than an upscale restaurant. When Luna reached the entrance, she extended her hand to the elderly man with the same warmth she had shown him during hundreds of morning encounters at Pioneer Courthouse Square. But this time, instead of accepting a paper bag containing breakfast, he took her hand and spoke in a voice that carried more authority than his appearance suggested. "Captain Rodriguez," he said quietly, using a name and rank that belonged to someone who officially no longer existed. "I believe it's time." The words sent a chill through Luna that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning and everything to do with the realization that her past had just announced itself in front of 50 people who thought they knew who she was. She glanced back at the room full of guests, at David's concerned face as he noticed her absence from their table, at Patricia Chen's expression of growing alarm as she processed the strange tableau playing out near the restaurant's entrance. "Not here," Luna said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet command that suggested she was accustomed to making decisions under pressure. "Not now." But the elderly man shook his head with the stubborn determination of someone delivering a message that couldn't be delayed or edited for convenience. "Captain, with respect, we don't always get to choose our timing. Sometimes circumstances choose it for us." He gestured toward the restaurant's front window, where Luna could see what appeared to be military personnel taking positions along the street outside Romano's. They weren't obvious about their presence, but her trained eye could identify the subtle signs that marked them as professionals. Their positioning, their awareness, their coordinated movement patterns that spoke of planning and purpose. 8 members of your former unit are currently outside this establishment. The man continued. They've been searching for you for 18 months. They have information that changes everything about what you think you know regarding Operation Midnight Sunday. Operation Midnight Sunday, the mission that had ended Luna's military career and started her life as a sandwich maker in Portland. The operation that had cost her everything she thought she was fighting for and everyone she thought she could trust. Hearing the name spoken aloud in the middle of her engagement party felt like having her past and present collide with enough force to destroy both. Luna's mind raced through possibilities and consequences as she tried to process what was happening. If her former unit had found her, it meant her carefully constructed identity had been compromised. If they were outside Romanos, it meant they had been tracking her movements. If they had information about Operation Midnight Sun, it meant the mission that had supposedly ended with her death might have been something entirely different from what she had understood at the time. Captain? David's voice came from directly behind her, confusion evident as he approached the entrance where his fiancée was having what appeared to be an intense conversation with someone who looked like he belonged in a completely different environment. Luna turned to face the man she was supposed to marry, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since they had started dating. David Chun, software engineer, normal person, someone whose biggest concerns involved debugging code and planning weekend activities. Someone who had fallen in love with a carefully constructed fiction, and who was about to learn that the woman he wanted to spend his life with didn't actually exist. David, she said carefully, I need you to trust me for the next few minutes. I need you to believe that everything I'm about to tell you is true, even if it sounds impossible. But before David could respond, the restaurant's front door opened and 8 individuals entered Romanos with a kind of coordinated precision that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. They wore civilian clothes, but their movement patterns, their positioning, and their awareness of their surroundings marked them as military personnel executing a planned operation. The lead figure, a woman in her early 30s with short blonde hair and eyes that missed nothing, approached Luna with the respectful distance of someone addressing a superior officer. Captain Rodriguez, she said formally, permission to speak freely? The entire restaurant had fallen silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as diners turned to stare at what appeared to be a military briefing taking place in the middle of an engagement party. David stood frozen beside Luna, his expression cycling through confusion, concern, and the beginning of understanding that his fiancée might not be who he thought she was. Luna looked around the room at faces that reflected various stages of shock, bewilderment, and growing awareness that they were witnessing something far outside their normal experience. Patricia Chin clutched her wine glass like an anchor to reality. Maya, who had somehow ended up at the party despite being just a co-worker, stared with the expression of someone whose understanding of a universe had just been fundamentally challenged. Granted, Luna said quietly, and her voice carried a kind of authority that made it clear she was accustomed to being obeyed without question. The blonde woman stepped forward and spoke in a voice that carried throughout the silent restaurant. Ma'am, Operation Midnight Sun was not what we were told. The intelligence was falsified. The targets were civilians. Command structure was compromised at the highest levels. You were declared Kia because you refused to participate in what amounted to war crimes. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in before continuing. 18 months of investigation have confirmed that your actions saved civilian lives and exposed corruption that reaches into Pentagon-level decision-making. You've been posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, and the Secretary of Defense has personally requested your return to active duty. The words hung in the restaurant's air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Luna felt the weight of 50 pairs of eyes on her, the pressure of David's growing confusion, and the reality that her carefully constructed anonymity had just been destroyed in the most public way possible. She looked at the elderly man who had started this chain of events, understanding finally who he was and why he had accepted her morning offerings with such dignity. Command Sergeant Major, she said, recognizing the posture and bearing that had marked him as former military despite his homeless appearance. He smiled with genuine warmth for the first time since she had known him. Captain Rodriguez, I've been maintaining surveillance and providing security for your location since you established residency in Portland. Your morning routine gave me the opportunity to confirm your well-being without compromising your operational security. David stepped forward, his voice barely audible. Luna, I don't understand any of this. Who are you? Luna turned to face the man she was supposed to marry, seeing their relationship with the clarity that comes from having your cover blown in the most dramatic way possible. David, she said gently, I'm Captain Luna Rodriguez, former commander of a classified special operations unit. I was declared killed in action 18 months ago because I refused to carry out orders that would have resulted in civilian casualties. I've been living under an assumed identity while my unit investigated corruption in military command structure. The restaurant remained silent as David processed information that challenged everything he thought he knew about the woman he wanted to spend his life with. Luna watched his face cycle through emotions she couldn't quite read, understanding that their relationship would never be the same regardless of how this evening ended. Patricia Chun found her voice first. "You mean you've been lying to my son for 18 months?" The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be dangerous and enough misunderstanding to be unfair. Luna had been lying, but not in the way that Patricia Chun meant. She had been protecting David from knowledge that could have destroyed his career, endangered his safety, and burdened with secrets he was never meant to carry. "Mrs. Chun," Luna said carefully, "I've been protecting your son from involvement in matters that are classified at levels that could affect national security. Everything I've told him about who I am as a person has been true. Everything I've felt for him has been real. The only lies have been about my professional background." The blonde woman stepped forward again, her expression suggesting she understood the complexity of the situation, but also the urgency of their mission. "Captain, we have transportation waiting. The briefing is scheduled for 0800 tomorrow morning. Command needs your decision regarding return to active duty." Luna looked around the restaurant one more time, at the faces of people who had thought they were attending a normal engagement party, and instead had witnessed what amounted to a resurrection. She looked at David, whose expression suggested he was struggling to reconcile the woman he loved with the military officer who had just been revealed to him. "David," she said, "I need you to understand that none of this changes how I feel about you. But it does change everything about what our future together would look like." David's response revealed the kind of character that had made Luna fall in love with him in the first place. "Luna," he said quietly, or Captain Rodriguez, or whoever you are, "I need some time to process this. But I need you to know that I don't care about your past as much as I care about whether you trust me enough to be honest about your future." The question hung between them like a challenge and an invitation. Luna realized that David was offering her something that her military training had never prepared her for: the possibility of a relationship built on truth rather than operational security, love rather than strategic necessity. She looked at the 8 members of her former unit, at the command's Sergeant Major, who had watched over her for 18 months while pretending to be homeless, at the restaurant full of people whose understanding of reality had just been fundamentally altered by the revelation that ordinary people could carry extraordinary secrets. "I need 48 hours, she said finally. 48 hours to arrange my affairs and decide whether Captain Rodriguez is ready to return from the dead." The blonde woman nodded with professional understanding. "Understood, ma'am. We'll maintain surveillance and security until you're ready to make your decision." As the military personnel filed out of Romano's with the same precision they'd used to enter, Luna stood in the middle of a restaurant full of people whose lives had just been touched by the reality that heroes sometimes worked in delis, that warriors sometimes made sandwiches, and that the most extraordinary people often lived the most ordinary lives. David approached her with the careful steps of someone trying to navigate entirely new emotional territory. "Luna," he said, "Captain Rodriguez, whoever you are, I have one question. Was any of it real?" Luna's answer came from a place deeper than operational security or strategic thinking. "David," she said, "the woman who fell in love with you was real. The woman who wanted to build a normal life with you was real. The only thing that wasn't real was the idea that I could escape from who I used to be." She gestured toward the window where the elderly man was talking to military personnel who had revealed her identity. "Command Sergeant Major Thompson spent 18 months living on the streets to protect me. 8 members of my unit spent 18 months investigating war crimes to clear my name. They risked their careers and their lives because they believed in something worth fighting for." Luna looked around the restaurant where her engagement party had become something between a military briefing and a public revelation. "The question isn't whether what we had was real, David. The question is whether it's strong enough to survive the truth about who I actually am." David's response would determine not just their future together, but Luna's decision about whether to return to a world of classified missions and strategic operations or to find some middle ground between Captain Rodriguez and the sandwich maker who had learned to recognize invisible people. The evening ended with more questions and answers, but also with the understanding that love, like military service, sometimes requires courage that goes beyond what seems reasonable or safe. Luna Rodriguez had spent 18 months learning to live as someone else, but the events at Romano's had taught her that identity isn't something you can escape entirely. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or tactics, but with a decision to trust someone else with the truth about who you really are. The elderly man who had been feeding pigeons with breadcrumbs collected from garbage cans was actually Command Sergeant Major Thompson, a decorated veteran who had volunteered for 18 months of homelessness to ensure Luna's safety. The morning routine that her co-workers had criticized as misguided charity had actually been daily confirmation that she was alive and well, reported through channels that connected back to Pentagon-level operations. The engagement party at Romano's became the night Luna Rodriguez learned that some secrets are too important to keep forever, that some truths are worth the risk of exposure, and that the difference between hiding and protecting isn't always clear until circumstances force you to choose between anonymity and honor. Whether she decided to return to active duty or find some other way to serve her country, Luna knew that her days of invisibility were over. Captain Rodriguez was officially no longer dead, which meant Luna Rodriguez, sandwich maker, would have to evolve into something new, a person who could integrate her past and present into a future that honored both her service and her humanity.